My name is Jan-Christoper Horak. I'm director of UCLA Film and Television Archive, and I go by Chris. Well, I wasn't really brought into the fold. I kind of feel like I've been there from before the beginning.
Yeah.
My first connection with was with FAAC, and I attended my first FAAC meeting in summer of 1976. I was a postgraduate intern at Eastman House at the time, and Eastman House hosted the meeting that year, and it was basically 8 people sitting around a table who then kind of made the decision as to where the AFI preservation money would go. And it was basically divided up between the major and nitrate holding archives. So my boss, James Card from Eastman House, was at the meeting, Eileen Bowser from the Museum of Modern Art, Jan-Christoper from the Library of Congress, I think, let's see, who else was there? Probably Larry Carr from the American Film Institute. Those are the people I remember. There may be a couple of other people, but that was basically it. UCLA wasn't there yet because UCLA didn't have any preservation activities. In fact, the archive had been founded 10 years earlier, but it was a television archive, and they had like 1 or 2 volunteer employees at that time period, but Bob Rosen, who was the first director, didn't start until I think 76 or 77. So that was really my introduction. And then when I returned to Eastman House after getting my PhD in September of '84, that's when I regularly became involved in FAAC, and I think I went to almost every one of the meetings. And of course, at the same time, I was also involved in FAAC because we were, of course, a member of FAAC. And so I saw there were a lot of issues with FAAC that we didn't want to have with AMIA, and so I actually was one of the people also involved in beginning the organization. As you know, I was actually the number 2 member. And I was elected the first vice president then the next year, with Bill being the first president. So this business about institutional versus individual membership, this was really such an important issue. And for me, one of the really important criteria there was that, FAAC, because it was institutional, was very political. A lot of topics couldn't get discussed because there were sensitivities between, at that time, it's the Cold War between like Moscow and Washington, or, the Germans and the Italians, or all these things. So that was one thing we wanted to stay clear of. And the other, and this is really important, that it's right around the time of the founding of AMIA in 1990 that the studios really start getting more involved in FAAC. Grover had started coming probably around the mid-'80s, I think, into FAAC, and FAAC was really anti-private archives, private studios. They saw the studios as really like the enemy, just as, frankly, the studios saw the archives and the archivists as enemies that were pirates and stealing stuff. And that really started to change right around that time. And I have to give Grover a lot of credit because he organized a meeting, I think it was in 1990, where he invited all of the archivists to Los Angeles to talk about Columbia preservation. And it was the first real cooperation between the private and nonprofit sector. So when we were thinking about AMI, thought the private sector has to be involved. The labs have to be involved. The vendors, the studios, because we're all in this together. And I think that was one of the main reasons why we decided it has to be individual membership and not group membership. The other thing was that in FAAC, to the FAAC conferences, usually the director went and maybe one assistant or something like that, but it was always, not more than a couple of people. And those were literally the only ones that were involved in FAAC. And of course, they'd go back and report to their staff, but nobody really had any stake in the matter. And by making it an organization of individual members, anyone could be involved, even if you were just interested in the field and were not working or had ambitions to get into the field. And it became a wonderful way to really integrate people and to get people to understand what the field was about, etc. And get a huge number of people involved in the organization. So that's why, the committee structure that we had, and initially the committee structure was almost the same as FAAC too. We had a preservation committee, we had an access committee, but that broke down pretty quickly because it was clear that, there were many, many different groups with many of their own agendas that needed to be represented. And so that structure just blossomed and expanded to what we have now. And it meant that people were involved in the organization, not just, the 3 days of the conference like at FAAC, and then didn't think about it the rest of the year, that people were working pretty much all year round for the organization. So I think that was really important. It was a huge step forward, and to my mind is why the organization has grown the way it has. And it certainly was my agenda that we would become not an anti-FAAC, but a completely different organization from FAAC. Because we didn't want to be redundant either, right? And it turns out our structure has been much more robust than FAAC's. I mean, FAAC, it still exists and it's still an important international organization, but to this day, there's still problems in getting people involved and getting committee work done and stuff like that because of this structure that nobody has a stake in it, and the fact that each one person pays their own dues. Most people have to pay their own way to come. Even at UCLA, I give everyone a subsidy, but I can't afford to have as many people as we want to have here just on the university budget. So, they get a subsidy, but they come in. And again, it gives them a stake in the field and in the organization, and that's made it all the more stronger. And right from the beginning, too, we, in the first couple conferences, we already set up this kind of boot camp at the beginning for new members, which again was an innovation that has worked so well for the organization, that when new people come, that they're welcomed into the group, that we had a mentoring system pretty soon, things like that people felt welcome and were embraced in a way. Because you can sometimes, that too, you go to an academic conference and if you don't know anyone, you could be left standing like the whole time and nobody will ever give a hoot about it, right? That never happened at AMIA. No matter how young you were, no matter how experienced, everyone felt this obligation to help people learn about it and get involved in things like that. And it's that welcoming attitude was unbelievably important in terms of the growth of the organization. That everyone is on the same plane. You go to academic conferences and there's a pecking order and stuff, and I also find, my wife once said this to me, archivists are so much nicer than academics. Everyone's more interested in helping each other than, even if they have contrary attitudes. There's a level of discourse that's very different from like SCMS, where it's just as easy that somebody is going to tear you to shreds as compliment you, right?
Yeah.
I think that's
in
right.
public.
Yeah.
Something like that kind of dressing down never happens here. The moving image. I was out of AMI for a couple of years when I went to Europe and was director of the Munich Film Museum, and then I came back, and it was right around the time where there were plans. I was still at Universal, but there were plans to start the Moving Image Archive Studies program at UCLA, and what I was already thinking about was the fact that there was no literature in the field. And that is what we really needed. And so I pushed very hard to start this journal. And interestingly enough, there was a huge amount of resistance. It took me 2 years to push. I was in the publications committee. And Sally Hubbard was there, Greg Lukow, and we had put a proposal together. And the board, initially the board rejected it. And the reason the board rejected it was they were afraid it would fail. They were afraid it would fail. They were afraid that there would be an investment and then nobody would want to write for it. And so it was a real challenge. And I finally went in front of the board and I said, I will guarantee that this is not going to fail. And that I think that, if we look beyond just, the authors that are around this room, that there will be people who will write about these things. So, and I said, and we need this for the field. We need to start documenting how we do things, why we do things. We need to start creating a theory of moving image archiving, because again, right after that, the MIS program started, then the MIAP program, and this literature was important. The listserv, I think, had started around that time. So there's some discussion, but it needed to be codified. So, so I took on the task of editing the journal, and the job that 3 people are now doing that are getting paid, I did myself as a volunteer.
Gosh.
I edited the first 12 issues and basically did virtually all of the editorial work. I had some help on, some of the business aspects, but most of the editorial work I did. In terms of, in terms of the initial issues, I didn't wait for people. I went out to specific people. I said, I want you to write something.
What are the years again for those? For the first
2000, the first issue came out, well, I started in 2000, we got approved, I think, in early 2000, and our first issue was then spring 2001. And so from 2001 through the end of 2006, the first 12 issues I did. And so I would go solicit articles, and so the first couple issues were really kind of structured by the fact that I was asking people. We did have a peer review process already right from the beginning, because I wanted it to be taken seriously as a real journal and not just a publicity rag.
Right.
So that was really important. So we did have that peer review structure in place. But I have to admit that I cheated. Not in terms of what other people said, but a lot of archivists were not used to writing a lot. So I was seriously rewriting a lot of pieces before I even sent them to peer review. And because this is the only way to do it, because it was just to get the thing moving, But after the 3rd or 4th issue, we started getting enough material that it wasn't a problem. Although there were some pieces I still had to rewrite. Again, some people are not really good writers, and I did want it to have a really high level of writing too, because I thought that's the only way it would be read. So, and we also decided that it really had to cover not just technology and the specifics of moving image archiving, but also, more film historical pieces that worked with archival material, or that were based on the preservation or restoration of archival material. So,
and represented the people.
And representative, and also, many different kinds of collections, many different, the first pieces on amateur film and home movies and stuff like that, or, all that was really important, that being represented in the journal. So, I mean, and then after 12 issues, I would have loved to have continued it, but I just ran out of energy. And also because I was then completely unemployed for a while, and I really needed to focus on getting a job and stuff like that. So, but since then we've had, a series of editors, and I think I am certainly gratified that it has continued at the level that I had really wanted it to be since the beginning. So,
speaking of the student who was in those programs, I think that gave us something to aspire to. Like there was no guarantee you were going to get placed in a journal, but I think that you were right. As those things coincided, you knew that there was a possibility that you could get published for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
If you try, the door was a little wider open to you than another.
Well, teaching in the MIS program was, there were almost every issue there was at least one piece by one student.
Yeah.
Again, oftentimes with a lot of editorial help to get it in a shape, because most students are not used to that level of writing. But I think it was great. Snowden got her piece published, one of the first pieces she ever published. When she was still in the library program at UCLA. Right, San Francisco. That was the first full year of Bill's presidency, and David Packard did the keynote at the San Francisco conference. So I organized the next conference under my presidency in Chicago. Mm-hmm. That was '93.
Yep.
And I'm from Chicago, and at that time my mother-in-law was still living there, so we did it at Downtown Hotel, and I got Leonard Maltin to do the keynote, which was great. He was really, really great, because he's, of course, someone who's always been interested in archiving and film history and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so it ended up being a pretty good conference, and as far as I think right from the beginning, the conference structure was pretty much in place and hasn't really changed a lot since then, because it's served well, that the conference proposals get accepted, and then that they're dealing with virtually so many different aspects of the field.
To answer this question, but the president's always had a hand in the place, this choice of cities and everything. At
that time, yes, because remember, this is before there was any administration. You remember the first 4 or 5 years of AMIA, basically it was Greg Lukow and some of his staff at the American Film Institute were doubling as administrators for the organization, and so it was really dependent on the president and the board to. Did we even have a board in the first couple of years? I don't even think I remember. I don't think we even had a board at the beginning.
Yeah.
I don't know when that came in. I don't think that came in until after that.
Just when the workload.
You'll have to check up on that, because I'm not quite sure. But I pretty much remember that the organization was, a lot of it I had to do too, as president. So.
Huh.
And so I found the conference hotel and
oh wow.
That's a lot of work.
I found the keynote speaker and organized some of the events, and found found the theater where we could do
You didn't have to read all the proposals, I'm hoping. You didn't have to read all the proposals.
No, I think we had a conference committee to do that. Yeah. Right from the beginning, but some of the big stuff, I want to say that I think the other thing that's really great about AMI, and we saw it this morning, is right from the beginning we had an education committee that started thinking about scholarships and about helping the youngest generation get into the field, and that along with the establishment of training programs at universities has really been important, because it really shows the way the organization is concerned about
Longevity.
training
Yeah.
and longevity. Yeah. And those scholarships that have been set up, I mean, some of them are considered continued now for 10, 15, 20 years, and it's really been an important way to have the organization come together too.